Selzer here from NurFACE Games. This video is for anyone who wants to get started with VR development. Mobile VR is a great place to get started, and the most accessible mobile VR is Google. So we got Google Cardboard and Google Daydream, which is coming out. So with these SDKs, Google Daydream and Google Cardboard, the easiest way to get going is with Unity. So you could get Unity here, but there's a couple of issues that might make VR development a little more complicated. So to make things easy, go to the Unity download archive. The link is in the description. And without going into the details, Unity 5.3.3 is a really good stable version. So go ahead and download this and choose the installer, because the installer will let you select Android as a build target, or perhaps iOS if you're using iOS. So Unity 5.3.3, once you have that downloaded, go ahead and open up Unity. Now we're going to talk about how to make a really simple project for VR, and we'll just call this new VR project. And so when Unity opens, I have a main camera directional light. Now, if you're brand new to Unity, you should do some learning. So go to Unity Learn, and here we are. This link is in the description as well. It's the Unity tutorials. Go through some of these game tutorials. They're very easy. They show you how to make simple games. Start with Rollerball maybe. And if you want to get more advanced into different topics, go through all these different topics that are available for tutorials. There's even virtual reality tutorials. So this is a great place to get started with Unity. If you are new to coding and you don't quite know what a bool or a string or a variable, a function, all these different things are, you need to go through this coding in Unity for the absolute beginner. It's about a 1-hour class, and it's a great tutorial for the beginner to Unity who wants to learn coding for Unity. So this link is also in the description. So now that we kind of have some basics of Unity covered, and when this opens up, you understand what the light and the camera is, we're ready for some VR development. And you can actually get started if you don't know that stuff. This video is easy enough. So we're going to be using Google Cardboard and Google Daydream. And so what that is on the development side is the Google VR SDK. So the Google VR SDK for Unity is the one that we're looking at. And here we are. Another link that's in the description. Take you right here to the, take you right here. We can learn about it, but the most important thing is the downloads. So we want to download the Unity package, and I prefer to get it from GitHub. So it says if you click here, we're going to go right to the GitHub project, and that's where I want to go. Again, I'm going to put the GitHub link right there in the description. And here we are. We can say download the zip. If you want a previous version of the Google VR, maybe you don't want the current 1.0, you can click on that commits button, and here is a list of all of the previous SDKs. We could go right back to 0.41 from 2014. This, we're going to consider that we're going to be using Google VR for Unity version 1.0, which is the current, so we click download zip. Now, once that zip is downloaded, you have a directory, and thank goodness your desktop's a lot cleaner than mine is. You have a directory like this, the Google VR for Unity Master version 1.0. And I put the V 1.0 on this folder, so I know which one it is. But there's a Unity package in here, so we're just going to import this Unity package. So we're going to say assets. We could double click that Unity package, or we could say import custom package. And so that's on my desktop. at the Google VR version 1.0. And let's open up the Unity package. Now maybe you're developing for Android, or maybe you're developing for iOS. But if you're just developing for one of those, you can go ahead and go to this plugins folder. They have an iOS plugins, the Android plugins. So deselect iOS if you're developing for Android exclusively. And the other one that some users have complained about plugin conflict when they import the Google VR SDK is there's the audio plugin for VR for 32-bit and for 64-bit. And because I'm not building to any x86 processors, which are basically Intel processors, I'm only building to ARM processor. I don't need this x86 32-bit support, so I'm just going to deselect that. I'm going to include the x86 64-bit support just in case I want to use build an exe on this computer. So I've deselected iOS and the x86 folder, and I'm including the plugin for Android and 64-bit x86 processors. The rest of everything I'm going to import, and we can look at that. Now we get this message because we're using Unity 5.3. It says additional libraries must be imported for Google VR to be compatible with this version of Unity. Please upgrade to Unity 5.4. We don't want to do that. Maybe in future releases we do, but currently the native Unity support for Google Daydream and Google Cardboard is a little bit buggy, and so I recommend as of this date to be using Unity 5.3.3. We're going to cancel and do not show again. It says compatibility checks can be ignored. So what we're going to do is we have these errors because we don't have the current Unity version. And to fix that, we need to use this Google VR 5.2 and 5.3 compatible Unity package. So double click on that. And it'll open up. Mine's actually messed up. So I'm going to click Show and Explore and copy the path and say Import Package. And the point is we need to open up that Unity package right here because it has these different files in the Android plugin folder. So we're going to import those. And now the Google VR 1.0 SDK is compatible with our Unity 5.3.3 version. So we're ready to start developing. I'll get started with a blank scene in a moment, but we can also look at the headset demo. Now the controller demo is for the Google Daydream controllers. So when you see the controllers here and the Daydream headset, if you don't have that, no worries. It doesn't stop you from developing. Get started with Google Cardboard or just developing for the Daydream headset without the controller support yet. And that is the headset demo. So open up the headset demo. And here's a really good example of how some of the VR stuff functions. You'll see there's a dot that responds to the object, and we can click on it. And that's the click on the Google VR headset. And there's a canvas that shows us the frames per second. And there's a floor canvas which has buttons on it, so you can see that the Unity buttons work. So if you need to use UI, you can use Unity's UI. And for an example of how that works, look at this demo scene. And so if we're starting from a completely blank scene, how we would make things work is go to the prefabs folder, and there's the GVR Viewer Main. Drag this into the scene. So you need to have a camera and a Google VR Viewer Main. I'm going to add a plane so that there's some reference. And I'm going to put the camera in the middle of the plane. And a distance of 2 meters seems good. So if we were to hit play, we have a working Google VR scene in Unity, and this would actually work on our Android device if we were to build and run it. Before we do that, let's cover some more functionality of the Google VR SDK. So if we want to track our frames per second, we can go into the Utilities folder and bring in the Google VR frames per second canvas. Now this should be attached to the camera. And another thing is, if we want to move the camera, it needs to be a child of another game object. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call it VR Main. And that's going to be at 0, 0, 0. The main camera will be a child of that. And put that at 0. I'm going to move the VR Main up to 2. So that the main camera maintains a 0, 0, 0 position. And here is the Google VR frames per second canvas. And so if we hit play, we don't see that canvas because the position is off. We're going to put that to 0, 0. And we'll hit play again. There we go. And we see that we have the text. Now the text doesn't look that great. If I wanted to fix that, I could increase the font size maybe to 24, and that means the size of the text box needs to get increased, and that means that it's too close to the face. It needs to move away. So the position Z, I'm going to increase to 2. And I still can't see all the text, so I could increase the size of that box if I wanted to. And then the position on the X, you could move it where you wanted, off to the side. And if I want to save these values when I stop running, I'm just going to click Copy Component and Stop, because it's going to reset. Now, if I come up here, I can paste component values. And so it puts in what I had set in the editor. So that looks a lot better. And so we got a frames per second counter. And now we want to get some UI. So there's this GVR dot. That again, it needs to be a child of the camera, because wherever the camera turns, you know, the frames per second needs to follow, and so does the dot. So now we can see I have the dot in the middle of the screen. And just to clear things up, I'm going to turn off the frames per second canvas. If I want to interact with an object like a box, then I just need to make sure that it has a collider, which Unity adds that by default. And that means that the dot will be able to react to it. But right now there's no event system. We need to add a event system, so we need to click on UI event system. So now that we have the event system, we also need to get the gaze input module. This is a part of the Google VR SDK, and we're going to move that up above the standalone input module, and that allows events like pointer enter, pointer exit, pointer click to work with the gaze, which is here the dot. So, and the dot is white and everything else is white. So just to make things easy, I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to give it a green color and assign this to the ground. Here I can pick my green color, and I'm going to press Control D to duplicate that and name it brown with F2, and we'll just pick a brownish looking color. There we go. Okay, so we got the box, we got the ground, and the dot doesn't do anything on the box, and the reason why is because it needs to have an event trigger. So I'm going to add a component called event trigger, and now we will see the dot do nothing. And the reason why is the camera needs to have a Raycaster. So this is a physics Raycaster, and we can select which layers for it to respond to. Right now it's on everything. So now, because there's a physics Raycaster shooting from the camera, it can respond to the box, and we could do stuff from here. So on the cube, if we were to add a new component called cube script and double click on this, we can edit it in Visual Studio or mono develop, and we'll just do a basic debug.log hello world. So there's these start and update functions. If you want to learn what these are, you can go to the Unity mono behavior scripting API, and it shows you all of these messages. The ones that the default Unity comes with when you open up a new script is start, right here, and update. So read about start and update to learn about what they do and why you would want to put code in there. For now, we want to make a new function. We're going to call it void my first VR function. Okay, so my first VR function is public so that other scripts can access it. In this case, the event trigger wants to access it. And so it returns void, which is, so it just returns nothing. And all we want it to do is debug.log hello world. So we have a script called cube script. We got the event trigger. We're going to add an event trigger called pointer on pointer click. And there's all kinds of events. The pointer enter is when the dot goes into the object, and pointer exits when the dot goes out. And you got pointer down and pointer up. So that's a click is essentially a down and an up. So on pointer click, we want to do a new event, and in this case, it wants an object. We want to use the cube, and this cube has a script called cube script. So I'm going to say cube script, and we're going to find that function we wrote. Because it's public, we can see here my first VR function. Now I just press Control S to save, and I need to save my scene. So I'm going to go to my assets folder, and I'm going to make a new folder here called scenes, and it's misspelled. There we go. And I'm going to say VR scene 01. Okay, so I have my scene saved into this folder right here. Perfect. If I hit play, I have my VR game, and there's a dot, and it responds to the box. And if I click on the box and I look at my console, it says hello world. So it's running that function when we click on the box. Now, if we wanted to do something like make a terrain, and we would probably want to import this environment package from Unity, but we might not want everything in the package. I'm going to click none, but if I look in the standard assets folder, there is some environment terrain assets, and in the terrain assets there's some surface textures. So I'm going to grab the surface textures, and I'm going to click on my terrain and go to the settings, or go to the paintbrush to say edit textures, add texture. We can now select one of the textures that we have, like the grass, and we can add it. So now there's a grass, and we can use these paint tools to draw our terrain. Okay, and I'm going to move the terrain to -500. Let's see, -250 and -250. because that will put it right in the middle. So the green grass plane that I had made earlier, I'll just turn that off because it doesn't make sense anymore. And here it is. We got a nice landscape, a box that does something with the function. Now, if I want to move around, there's a lot of tutorials on this channel for movement. There's a whole playlist for movement. And the other thing you can do is we've taken all those movement tutorials and put them into one pack, and that's the mobile VR movement pack. So if you type mobile VR movement pack, you'll find this pack. And it's just 5 different ways to do movements. So that could take you from here to moving all around the map. Or just check out some of the other tutorials. Now this won't run very good on mobile VR because it has a dynamic light. If I look at my directional light, it's set to real time. And the fact is, with mobile VR, these phones can't do all these graphics with the real-time lighting. So you need to set this to baked. And that means you need to go into your lighting tab and configure this for doing a bake. So I'm going to uncheck auto. And we could see that there's real-time ambient global illumination. That needs to be set to baked. We also have pre-computed real-time global illumination. That needs to be turned off. And we have baked global illumination. That's what we want. But the baked resolution is fine. But for just testing, we can lower that to maybe 10 to make our bakes faster. And we can do directional light maps, use 2 light maps. And that looks better, and that's fine. But if you want to take that down even further to 1 light map, you could do non-directional light maps. And we can't necessarily use fog on mobile VR yet. And an atlas size here, you could choose, 1024 is fine, or don't be afraid to try 2048. We need to make sure everything that's going to get light and shadows is set to static. So the cube needs to be set to static. So we're going to set static here, and that includes this light map static option, which tells Unity that when it does the bake, to go ahead and include that object into the light bake. So we want the terrain to be included as well. It's already set to static, and so because our box and our terrain are set to static, and our light map settings are set up, we can set build, and that's going to take a minute because that's a pretty big terrain. And it has to calculate all that lighting and shadows. Okay, so that's done, and it says there's one non-directional light map that's 512 by 512, and it takes up 341 kilobytes. If I want to see that, I can go into my scenes folder, and it creates a folder with the same name as your scene, and it puts the light map data into there. And here is the image itself. And if we want to see that again, we can click on the light maps button and see what it looks like. You can see basically the mountains here. Okay, so now that we have baked lights and our lighting is set to baked, and we have all the real-time turned off here, this will run fine on mobile VR at 60 frames per second. Okay, now we're ready to build this for Android and try it out. So we're going to go to the build settings. We need to switch to Android. And depending how many images are in your project, that could take a long time because it's changing the texture compression. Now you may want to try different texture compression like ETC2 or ASTC. Now we need to add the current scene to the build settings so there's actually a scene that's get built. We go to the player settings. We need to set some of the values here. We want to use landscape left. So turn off landscape left is the default orientation, and turn off use 32-bit display depth because it says use this only if you see banding as it has performance implications. And we're going to go to other settings. You need to set a custom bundle identifier, so it just needs to be something other than that. By default, of course it should be your company, your game name, and we can use forward or legacy vertex lit rendering path. Auto graphics API is okay, but you could take away OpenGLS2 support, and then we could say it requires 3.1 or 3.1 AEP if we want to make sure that even better devices are using that. Now, multi-threaded rendering is a good idea. Static and dynamic batching is a good idea out of the box, and there will be a video on optimization covering those later. Virtual reality supported is not checked because that only gives you support for Gear VR until a later version of Unity. You can check out the Unity Daydream preview. It's just not a good stable project yet. So if you go to the Google VR website for Unity here, they have a link to the Daydream technical preview, and the technical preview actually does have native SDK support for Google Daydream. So it's the Daydream and Cardboard SDKs are built into Unity essentially. So when you click the virtual reality supported button, you get access to the Daydream and the Google Cardboard SDKs. But in Unity 5.3.3, we don't have that, and that's currently the most stable version for VR development. Consider only allowing higher devices like Android 5 devices to download your VR app. That way you know that it's running good on good devices. Now, Mono 2X is fine, but IL2 CPP could give you better performance because it's using a native Android NDK compile. Now, you probably aren't developing for x86 processor if you're compiling to an Android phone, so you could just pick an ARM processor here, and we're not going to Android TV. So those are some of the basic build settings, and we pretty much are ready to compile and run. We could click build and run, or just build, and that would make the APK that would run on our device if our device has a gyro. So if you want to check your device to make sure it has a gyro, go to GMS Arena and type in your phone. So I could say S6 GMS Arena, and I could check to make sure that my phone has a gyro sensor because it's listed under sensors as gyro. So you have to have that for head rotation. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share the video. And stay tuned for more VR tutorials and videos coming up right here on the channel.